Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and it is our final book club episode of the year. I'm thrilled to be joined again by Shakespeare scholar and the author of The Great White Bard, Farah Karim-Cooper. She and I are going to break down William Shakespeare's perhaps most famous play ever, Romeo and Juliet. You all already know the story of star-crossed lovers who find each other amidst an intense family feud. It's been adapted into many films, which we talk about today. We also ask questions about which characters are the best, why this play is taught in schools still to this day, and I get a little spicy with some of my most hot Shakespeare takes. There are spoilers on this episode in case you're not familiar with Romeo and Juliet. Make sure to listen to the end of this episode to find out what our January 2024 book club pick will be. Quick reminder, everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. If you love this show and you want inside access to it, go and join the Stacks Pack. That's our members only group for book lovers that you can access at patreon.com/thestacks. When you join, you get perks like our Discord channel, our monthly virtual book club meetups, bonus episodes. Plus, if you join right now, you're going to get access to the Stacks reading tracker and be able to vote in our annual awards, the Stackies, starting in January. Plus, by joining the Stacks Pack, you get to support this podcast. So if you like what you hear and you appreciate the work that I do and the work that my teammates do, please, please, please head to patreon.com/thestacks and join us. I'd like to take this time to give a shout out to our newest members of the Stacks Pack, Despina Karas, Idera, Kumkum Parikh Malik, Melissa R. Green, and Bianca Louie. Thank you all so much for joining the Stacks Pack, and thank you to the entire Stacks Pack. I could not do it without you. All right, now it is time for the book club conversation on William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet with author and scholar Farah Karim-Cooper. All right, everybody, it's finally time to do Shakespeare on the Stacks podcast. I am joined again by the wonderful Farah Karim-Cooper, the author of The Great White Bard. We're discussing Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. We will be spoiling, but also you guys know what happens. But just in case you don't, if you've never read the book and you have no idea what this is, let me give you the quick synopsis, which is basically Romeo and Juliet, two teenagers, fall in love, their families hate each other, drama ensues. So that's the synopsis. Farah, first of all, hi, how are you?
I'm really good. How are you doing? It's great to be back.
I'm good. I'm so glad you're back. Okay, we always start here, which I think this will be kind of a loaded question for you since I know you know and love this play. What did you think? What do you think of Romeo and Juliet?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big question. What do I think of Romeo and Juliet? Well, it was my gateway drug to Shakespeare, as it is for most people. I think I talk about this in my book where I talk about how I met Shakespeare, and it was in my freshman English class. But it wasn't through the text. It was through the film version, which may have been some sort of prophecy about my future investment performance of Shakespeare as opposed to just reading Shakespeare.
Right.
But I remember watching the Zeffirelli film, which I think was made in the late 60s. And
68.
It was like stunning for me. And there's been a lot of bad Romeo and Juliet films. But that was a kind of key marker for me. And then the Baz Luhrmann one was a key marker for me. But I think
Okay, good. I was worried you were going to say that was a bad one. And I was
I loved it.
Okay, good. Because I love it.
Yeah, we can geek out on that one at some point in this conversation.
Yes, we will. I have a whole section on the movies. Okay, let me give you my quick overview of the play. I love the play. It was not my first Shakespeare. My first Shakespeare was Midsummer's Night Dream in elementary school. I played Peas Blossom or something. One of the little fairies, maybe Mustard Seed. I don't know. One of those little ones. But in high school, we did read Romeo and Juliet. But in middle school, the movie came out for me. So I was familiar with the story. I love the play. I think it's one of his bests. And we can talk about that too, because I want to know what you think about why it's one of the most popular ones. But every time I read it, I like it more. And I'm my previous reading informs it for me. So like I read it, I think in 2018, most recently before this week. And I remember thinking like, the adults in this play are a problem. And then when I read it this time, I was like, had that in the back of my head. And every single thing the Friar Lawrence says was like pissing me off. You know, it's like each time I read it, I'm like, oh, I remember thinking this. Or like the last time I read it, I remember thinking about how good Juliet's speeches were. And then this time when I was reading it, I was thinking about how her speech, how she almost like loses speech by the end of it. Like I was thinking so much about how good her text is. And like after everything that happens, like by the end, it's like she kind of disappears before she dies. And so those like little, like each time I read, I feel like it gets richer for me. But I do want to start with why you wanted to read this one on the show. Because I sent over a list, I think of like 7 or 8, and this is the one you picked. And so I'm curious why this play for this moment.
Well, I think I think I want people to think about the play a bit differently, I guess, as a Shakespeare scholar, but also as someone who has a teenage daughter. Yeah, because I think I'm always very curious, and I'd love to know what you think about this, as to why this play is the one that we teach freshman English. We teach 14, 15-year-olds this play, almost the exact same age of Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
And it ends in a double suicide of two teenagers. Right. And so I think for years that has been sensationalized and glorified and romanticized. And it's not new to romanticize tragic endings to lovers because, that's something that people have done for centuries. But we do it in a way that's almost pathological, so I think I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to talk about and flesh out what the play really is while also holding on to all the things that we love about it, because I do love this play. The poetry is sublime, even if some of it is quite racialized, but it is sublime poetry, and it is incredible. The moment when Romeo and Juliet lay eyes on each other, how they speak to each other, the way that's depicted in my 2 favorite films is, I haven't seen a production that's been able to surpass that.
I agree. That Holy Palmer's kiss scene is just like reading it, seeing it every time I get it, like makes you feel things. I don't think you can read it and not. With the verse, the way the verse is and the way that it's like a sonnet broken up and the rhythm, it's just so there. Even if you don't know anything about Shakespeare, if you read it out loud and you hear it out loud, it's just like, oh, whoa.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It's also incredibly intimate. I wrote a book a few years back about the hand on the Shakespearean stage. And I had a whole chapter on touch. And I had done lots of research on like the palm of the hand. And for women in the time, the palm of the hand was seen as one of the most intimate parts of the body. So, like how you touch a woman at court, you have to kiss the back of her hand. You cannot be kissing and touching the palm of her hand. And the fact that they hold each other's hands palm to palm suggests an intimacy that we kind of lose in the modern world.
Yeah. Okay. So why do you think this is the one we teach? I've been thinking about it a lot. Like, I guess I'll go first and tell you a little bit what I think. Okay. I think part of it is because the characters are the age of the students. And I feel like that feels like an easy entry point. The language is challenging for a lot of young people and adults. And so if you're like, great, most of the people in this play, Benvolio, Mercutio, Tybalt, Paris-ish, they're all like younger people. And so I think that that's like an easy entry point. I think that it's because there are good movies too. I think that's why like teachers are able to be like, look, you can see this and like feel it in a way that's exciting. And I think that I don't know that this is on purpose, but I do think that the sex in this play, there's so much like body language, so much sex, so many puns. I think that maybe like years ago when this became curriculum was maybe something that they talked about more in school in a way, or like kind of like like the creepy teacher who like says inappropriate things. It kind of has that vibe, So I feel like it like got into curriculum when like old white guys were in charge, and now it's sort of like, So I think that that's all part of it. But I do have questions about like about the suicide, obviously, and like why that's it. And I also feel like of the ones, I think we talked about this last time, like I think that Macbeth is a much better read. Like I think there are plays that are better reads. So much of this play, especially the first half, is wordplay. So much like, I mean, the first scene with the like two guys in the street, it's that whole like courier, whatever, like there's like 4 lines of just wordplay, and like so much of Mercutio is wordplay with Romeo, and Romeo rhymes so much. And I don't know that that translates as well off the page. So I don't know. But so why do you think?
So, I mean, I think a lot of it is to do with what you just said about, it's about identification. How to get young people interested in Shakespeare is show them the play that's about young people, that's about them. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's full of like the turbulence of teenage hormones and the sort of irrationality of adolescence and the kind of impulsive things that you do for your heart, for passion. You don't really think things through when you're 14 necessarily. Right. And so that's something that you can identify with. I mean, I know a lot of productions lately, particularly in England, have focused on the kind of street violence and knife crime and that kind of thing as a way of talking about current problems in society that teenagers are facing. So that's probably one way. It's a great sort of site for exploring their own worlds, like if it's handled really, really well. I think the way I was taught it, even though we saw this great film, I was taught it in a way that was sort of, ooh, look at this amazing romantic world. And I was like, wow, looking back, it wasn't so romantic at the end. No. And actually, as you say, the adults are pretty messed up.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I was teaching this play now as an adult and all that I know, I think in addition to what you're saying about like the sort of violence, I think I would teach it as like a cautionary tale that like adults actually don't know everything and that you have to question in these moments, because I think like Friar Lawrence is such a letdown at every turn. I'm very anti Friar Lawrence. I have got like, I'm so out on him. I think he's an idiot. Like, I think he knows nothing. I think there's a version of this where Friar Lawrence could be some form of like a cult leader. Like there's the scene where he's talking to Romeo after Romeo's banished, and he's like, be happy, like a toxic positivity guy. He's like, no, I've been working on my herbs. I've got this potion. It totally works. This is fine. I'm going to send a letter. Like I've got this. And then at the very end, when the prince is like, what happened? And he's like, well, John messed this up and the nurse knew about this. Like, I gotta go. And he's like, Juliet, I'll make you a nun. It's fine. Like, he's such a scammer to me. So I hate him. But I do think that I think that the nurse lets Juliet down. I think her parents let her down. I think the fact that Romeo's parents aren't around at all. Like, I think there's a conversation in this play about how even though the children make bad decisions, the adults are making consistently bad decisions over and over and over again. And I think that that's something that I would want to teach if I was teaching this play now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's something about the dysfunctionality of a society that starts with punishment, right? Mm-hmm. That punishment is like, that seems to be the mode. Everything's punitive, yep. When the prince comes out and says, stop the street fighting, the next person that does, this will be the consequence, and then Romeo's banished. And so there is, I feel for the friar a bit, because I think the friar's trying to do the other thing and try to move them away from the punitive and actually think of solutions. And actually, we could do it this way. It fails miserably. Yeah. But I think I'm a little bit more Team Friar than you are. Okay. Perhaps.
Well, I'm definitely, if you're at all Team Friar, you're more Team Friar than me. I think Friar is bottom of the barrel to me. I do think there's definitely like a punitive element. And I think what is good about this play, though part of the problem now is that everyone knows it and everyone's seen it, is that if you don't know what's coming, the ending is extremely shocking and upsetting. right?
Yeah.
Like, because the whole first half of the play, like most of Shakespeare's, or like some of Shakespeare's tragedies, is sort of a jovial play. There's a lot of fun. There's a party. They meet, they kiss, they go. And then, act 3, where Mercutio and Tybalt are killed, and that's sort of the switch. But if you really don't know what's happening, there's still a world where like you can believe that something else is possible. And I also, I think that that's a really interesting thing to teach if the teacher has a classroom of students who really don't know it, and like you really are reading the text and going on the journey that Shakespeare set up. I think so often productions now are done, and if the assumption is that everybody knows it, and so they're playing to the end from the beginning. Like, so many productions lose the fun and the joy of the first part, and like the bromance between Mercutio and Romeo. Like, as I was reading it, I totally forgot that that's even like in the text, because I think so much of like Mercutio as being, he's going to be dead soon, that I forget so much of like the levity of that character. And when after Romeo goes and after Romeo meets Juliet, and he's like, oh, are you still rhyming? Like, oh, you're still just Mr. Like this, like that playfulness I love. And I think that that's also a potentially great thing that you can teach, and like, as far as like story structure, and as like what the theater can do, I want to ask you a little bit about the language and the verse. How do you think about iambic pentameter? How do you suggest that other people think about it? Like, I know some people read for the iambic pentameter, some people read to the punctuation. I know people who say that they observe the verse, and then I see the production and I'm like, that's not the verse. So I'm curious how important that is to you.
So it feels that in this play, the poetry, the pentameter is important, to observe if you are cutting the script. You can't perform the whole thing because some of it's quite repetitive, particularly with Friar's kind of explanation at the end. It feels like if you're cutting the script as a director, you're going to have to really think about scansion. Do these lines scan? And so it's a kind of difficult task. So I think it does matter in this play. There are other plays where it matters less, but this is a play that uses the vehicle of poetry in order to communicate love and desire. And it was a chief vehicle for the expressions of love in that time period. And so Shakespeare is being very conventional, but unconventional there. So he's being conventional in that he's using this language as a way of saying there are ways to tell someone you love. And actually, sometimes you can't even use the most beautiful language to describe what's in your heart. And then he's being unconventional in that he's writing a play, and he's got sonnets being spontaneously composed by teenage lovers. I mean, it's extraordinary. So in some ways, the play is about poetry. So I do think that the poetry matters. But of course, you approach it with young people often with the story first, because that's what's going to grip them. And then you come in with the poetry.
Yeah, I think I told you that I was an actress, and I did a lot of Shakespeare in college, and I studied with Louis Sheeter, who did classical Shakespeare in New York. And then also one of the productions we did was directed by Tim Carroll, who I'm assuming
I know Tim very well.
And Tim is very intense about iambic pentameter, aggressively. And so was Louis. And so when I was in college, I encountered this play first in school, read it, just tried to figure out the words. But in reading it with with iambic pentameter and scanning the lines and doing it, I think the play's better. Like, I do think that you can find like the antithesis, and you can really find the arguments within the rhythm in a way that helps make sense of like exactly what, especially with Juliet, with what she's grappling with, like in the Gallop Apace speech and in the Banished speech. Like, she's really grappling, and in the speech before she takes the poison, she's really grappling and like convincing herself of something or figuring something out. And I think when you shy away from reading the lines as iambic pentameter and finding the rhythm, I think it hurts the story. Like, I think it takes away from the story itself. But I know so many teachers and people are like scared to use it. They think that it feels rote, or like, ba-da, da-da, 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 da-da. And it's like, no, you can still do that without doing that. And I think like this is at least for me, and I'm curious to hear what you think, because you, again, have that theater and English background, is like, I think that people in the theater are so connected to the performance of it, and people in the classroom are so connected to the language of it, that there's like a disconnect. And I think that that's part of like the problem that we have with Shakespeare with young people, is like, depending on where you get it first, you might not ever get it again. And so if that way doesn't click for you, you might not like it, you know? I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it does. I think in the classroom, you don't, as I was saying, you don't have to start with the poetry, because that is the scary part, because these words feel really archaic, and the way Shakespeare puts these words together is hard. But when you're able to work with students, and I've seen this before because I used to teach high school, when you work with students and you say, this is what it means, and then that light bulb goes on in their face and they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Yes, it is amazing that this is the sentiment he means. And it's because they can identify that meaning. But the fact that those words point to that meaning is gives the students a sense of confidence that they understand that. It's an accomplishment, it's an achievement, as much as it is a kind of revelation for them. So I think that you can go in. It doesn't have to be, let's just look at language. It could be, here's the story.
Right.
How many of you have felt this way? You know, and are you excited to feel this way? Oh, but look what can happen. So you just go through the story, you show them a film, and then sit down and do stuff with the language. And there are lots of activities that you can do with the language that actually are sometimes are rehearsal room activities. Yeah. The education department where I work at Shakespeare's Globe, a lot of our education practice is straight from the rehearsal room, you know, using techniques from the rehearsal room so that students are able to get their mouths around the words and then their minds around the meaning.
Yeah. I want to go into the play. I want to talk about the ages of these children. Is this book actually, perhaps, I know we can't actually get to what Shakespeare was thinking, but let's try. Do we think that this book is actually supposed to be read as romantic, or do we think that this is some sort of criticism on young marriage, or a cautionary tale against young people or old people or older people or whatever? Because Juliet's super duper young, and I know that people got married super duper young, but even in the book, there's some moments where it sounds like she's young, even younger than maybe the norm at the time.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's kind of a myth that in Elizabethan England, people got married when they were teenagers. Sometimes, you know, women in aristocratic households were betrothed early on to somebody so that, you know, they can keep the classes sort of aligned. But, you know, a lot of people, the average age was in the 20s. You know, it was like either 20, 25, even 27. So, yeah, that is kind of a myth. And so I don't think Shakespeare's necessarily making a kind of comment on his own moment. But I think what's really interesting is that it is a story that people had talked about, right? It's his source text is Arthur Brooks' 1563 sort of novella version of Romeo and Juliet. And then there's this kind of ancient story from Verona of this, you know, Juliet, this couple. And so he's drawing on sources, and the story is it's timeless. Like, people loved that story. So he's finding a new expression for quite a familiar story. And I think the age thing, I think there is, you hear Capulet at one point comment that, well, she's a bit young, Paris. I don't know if she's ready for this. You know, he does kind of comment in that way. But the anxiety of a patriarch like Capulet, who's only got one child, and it's a daughter, in a patrilineal society, which means that your kid, whichever kid you have, will inherit your property, and it should go through the male line. So whoever she marries, the property will belong to the man because it's patrilineal. Right. It won't be in her name. And so he's very, very concerned about who she ends up with. And I think that is what kind of really provokes him to enable her to be betrothed so early.
Yeah. I want to talk about love. Romeo is a fuckboy. Okay, I claim this for him. It is true. Yes. There is so much textual evidence that is who he is. from his friends, from the friar. Even wasn't there's like a part where the friar's like, "You love by rote." He's like, "You're so basic." That's the friar's best part for me when he's clowning on Romeo. But was love different then? Like, because like Paris at the very end when he's in the tomb, he's like, "Oh, my beloved Juliet," and I'm like, "I know you're sad, but you guys didn't even talk except for like twice in the entire play. Like, you don't know each other." And Romeo loves Rosalind, then he loves Juliet after 35 seconds, and then she loves him, and I'm just like, what was the deal with love?
So, first of all, I love the idea. So Romeo is like an archetypal Petrarchan lover, right? So this person who worships, uses...
That's a fancier way of saying
fuckboy. Exactly. Petrarchan lover, a.k.a. fuckboy, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he sort of over-romanticizes love, and he becomes obsessed with love itself as opposed to the person who he loves. And you see examples of that in Shakespeare. And what's so interesting is that Juliet kind of says, "Okay, I love the poetry, but... when are you going to get married to me?" Right? So what are we going to do about this? And I love that she brings some agency and action to the story. And, I think that's what I love about her the most. So I think love was, depending on, particularly if you're thinking about aristocratic families, love didn't really have a place when it came to marriage. But love, as Shakespeare sort of seems to suggest in many of his plays, is not necessarily married to reason or to social convention. And so human expression, human desire, human passion can escape, and we're not always in control of it. And there was huge sort of movement, particularly in the Reformation period, to be in control or to at least regulate your emotions, right? And if you can't do that, then somehow you've lost your sense of reason, and then that will lead to sin, and all kinds of bad things will happen. And this overregulation of the self is something I think Shakespeare seems to question in a lot of his plays. You can't control all the time how you're going to feel or how you're going to express yourself. And so if you do bottle things up, it will jump out in a way that feels unnatural. So he's looking at human compulsion in a way that I think a lot of his contemporaries weren't, because it was, you see a lot of texts at that time talking about love melancholy and how silly it makes you and how uncontrol of your senses you are. And you need to control your senses. You need to control your bodily desires. Otherwise, you're not a good citizen, let alone a good subject of God's. So I think he's sort of bashing against that. Particularly with this story. Love is a real thing. It is a real thing for them as much as it is for us. And you see that in poetry, not just Shakespeare's, and essays written about love. But the expectations from society about love and about marriage could be really oppressive. And I think this play is sort of dealing with that tension.
Right. Like the stakes feel a lot higher. Like being betrothed to Paris feels a lot higher than like the stakes if your parents now are like, "We would like you to get married to this person." Like feels like there's more options. I think also like the way that Shakespeare uses language in all of his plays, and like the way that he will change, the speed of like how many words are in a line, or like versus like longer lines, or like how much lines are shared, and like that quipping nature and all of that. I have always been taught to like read that as indicative of some change, right, in the text. So like, for example, the Holy Palmer scene, that there's clearly a connection between them because they're sharing so much of this sonnet, right, back and forth. And that shows that there's this connection. And so I think what's interesting in this play is that moment they're on the same page, but throughout a lot of the play, it doesn't feel like Romeo and Juliet are on the same page. They're always sort of Like she's asking him, how did you get in here? What are you going to do if my family finds you? And he's like, love, there's more peril in your eyes than your family. And she's like, no, they're literally going to kill you. And he's like, but I love you. And then like later at the postcoital scene where it's like, it's the nightingale. No, it's the lark. Like there's always sort of this disconnect between them, which I think is really interesting. And maybe that they're like trying to get back to that first moment of like really being on the same page and like the Palmer's kiss and the sharing of the lines. And I think it comes in and out, but I do find it interesting that so much of their relationship that we see is them being on a different page or like having these like little arguments and fights. And I don't know what it says, but it does. When you really read it and you take away the like idea of Romeo and Juliet, but you really read what's on the page, there is a conflict between them throughout. And like, and that carries over with they're not in the same place when he's banished and she's here. And you know, there's just something about that tension that I find really cool about this book. Like the idea of it versus what's actually there.
I really love that too. I think what's fascinating about it is the play is structured on this tension between binaries. So whether I remember I wrote an essay a long time ago about the sort of up and down language, the language of ascension and the language of descension. There's a lot of sort of vertical language in this play. So you've got Juliet up on her balcony and Romeo down under the shadows. And she's the sun and he's the opposite. And so you constantly get this sort of tension between them. And then you've got the sort of racialized black and white binary that's operating in the play. So night and day, and she's I think a swan among crows, describing her beauty. So there's opposites and the sort of you get a sense of, I like to use the word tension because it has a sort of tangible sensation to it. And that if you're pulling a rope and someone's pulling the other side, there's a real tension there. And it feels like there's things at stake. And I feel like the play is structured on that tension. And of course, the whole basis of the story is this feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. And so I think that's a really productive thing. And I think that's something that Shakespeare's doing very, very deliberately. And of course, because she's not a Rosaline, the person he was in love with before. She's Juliet. She's an embodied person, not some ghosty mistress of a sonnet,
right.
And so you get that tension too, because he's like, wait a minute, sonnet mistress, you're just supposed to be worshipped and adore that. And she's, no, I'm earthy, I'm human, I'm made of clay and flesh. And what are you going to do with me? What are you going to do with my body?
Right.
So I think that tension in the play is just absolutely delicious. It's what gives the play its energy.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back and talk about race. Valentine's Day is upon us and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the stacks. Okay, we're back. We got to talk about race because you wrote the book on it. I don't think that I ever would have thought of this play as being a racialized play. And I think probably most people would have the same, feeling about it. If you were like, oh, I wrote this book about Shakespeare and race, they'd be like, right, Othello, Aaron the Moor, maybe we get some Anthony and Cleopatra, maybe we get some Shylock. But you have a whole chapter or a whole section on Romeo and Juliet. And I'm wondering sort of like, what are we missing on this one when it comes to race?
People have wondered why I would include Romeo and Juliet in this book. And I think it's because I didn't approach race as a topic, but rather, I think I may have said this to you before, that I think of race as a context in which Shakespeare's operating, right? He's operating in a time of racial formation. We know that there were Black people and people of color living in England during the time Shakespeare was writing his plays. England was becoming a global, aspiring to becoming a global empire, and it eventually does 150 years later. And so there's all of this travel and exchange. And so that creeps into the language of the time, whether it's through racialized binaries, like between Black and white. Now, a lot of people say, oh, but those are just metaphors. They are metaphors, but studies have been done that show that metaphors related to color actually can impact upon the way in which we think about people. And we think about racial difference. And race had multiple meanings in that time period. It was associated with kinship, with stock, with lineage, with descent. And so these are concerns that the Capulets have, and so do the Montagues. When Tybalt sees Romeo at the Capulet ball, he says, oh, he's not of our stock. So it suggests that there's a sort of blood difference between them. And so, in my book, I don't say this is an interracial relationship in conventional terms, in the way that we understand it, but in terms of Renaissance ideas about who belongs with whom, it is interracial. And it's just a kind of invitation to think about it in that sense. But then you've also got in the imagery, you've got language like praising Juliet to emphasize her whiteness, using Blackness as a foil so that whiteness can shine even brighter, right?
Right.
She's a pearl in an Ethiop's ear as she stands against the dark night. Now, what is an Ethiopian doing being referenced in this play? So if we pretend that isn't there, then we can say this play has nothing to do with race, but we can't pretend that's not there. And Shakespeare uses the term Ethiop in several of his other plays, mostly in the comedies, as a form of anti-Black racism. So what is it doing there? When I researched that line, I was thinking, I thought, well, let me look at paintings. And of course, there are a lot of paintings from that time and after that show a white woman with a Black child or a Black servant child that often has a pearl in his ear. So this is some sort of trope about ownership, about the beauty of whiteness, the way whiteness can shine against Blackness. And that is racialized. And what's really interesting is that when you think about the methodology I used, which is performance studies, and what performance studies does is it uses the actor testimonial as a body of evidence about the meaning of a play. And two biracial actors who perform that part of Romeo and Juliet at the Globe, in conversations with me that have been documented, talked about the way in which that language made their bodies feel diminished. And so it was, whether Shakespeare intended it to be racialized or somebody who reviews my book doesn't agree it's racialized, two Black actors said, this is racialized and it's racializing me. So when, she found it really difficult to talk about, or to use the lines about how whiteness is actually being elevated in relation to Juliet, because it wasn't reflective of her own beauty as a biracial woman. So I think I think that there are lots of ways in which we can think about this play. And when I say we can think about it through the lens of race, it's not to say that's the only lens through which to see the play, but we just need to stop ignoring it. We need to stop ignoring race. So my point in emphasizing this play is that race is in there. It's a context. Shakespeare is thinking about it. It may not be about race, but there are racial images. And if you're teaching this play like we do to a class full of diverse students and they come across images that diminish their bodies and we don't acknowledge that, then I think we're trying to treat Shakespeare as some sort of benign genius. And that's kind of what I'm against anyway.
Right. I think it's also really interesting because, you know, one of the most famous adaptations of Romeo and Juliet is West Side Story. And they really play on the racial difference, though they sort of go the opposite way and make Juliet less white by making her Puerto Rican or whatever. I mean, that's not really the right phrasing of how race works, but you know what I'm saying? And they keep Romeo as white. And I think that that's really interesting because so many of the versions that I've seen that have had interracial Romeo and Juliet have had Juliet as the person of color. And I wonder if that is influenced by West Side Story or if that, I wonder why. I part of me thinks that maybe it's because Capulet is so angry. So it's easier to cast a person of color as an angry father because that plays into those stereotypes. Do you know what I mean though? Like, it's like, sure, having an angry black dad scream at his daughter and call her names is easier than having an angry white dad do it. I mean, even in the Claire Danes one, the dad is like, he at least looks like Sicilian or something, right? Yeah. Like he doesn't look pure white like we're told that Juliet is. So I think that that's like, I love the Capulets. They are my favorite characters in the play. All three of them. Juliet, Lady, and Dad, Capulet. I love those scenes. I love the scene where he flies off the handle and he go like it, because it's a scene about grief. They're all grieving, and he's like, no, we're not going to do it. Actually, fuck it, we're going to do it tomorrow. Like, everybody get here. You're going to get married. I love it, and I love Lady Capulet. I love that she's like trying to balance these two things, and she's like, look, girl. She always calls her girl. She's like, look, girl, figure it out. And like the scene starts with them. I know I'm like going on a tangent, but when the scene starts and everyone's like, Juliet, why are you still crying? And then I was like, maybe Juliet's a Cancer. And then I went back because Lammas Day is August 1st and she's born like a fortnight and a few days before that. So she is a Cancer. So she's emotional. And I'm like, this makes sense that she probably always cries about everything. And her family's like so annoyed with her. And they come in and they're like, what, girl, why are you crying still? And she's like, my cousin died. And they're like, get over it. Like, stop crying. And then the dad comes in. He's like, why are you crying? I just love the dynamic of that family. And like, I feel like if you're an actor and you get to play Capulet, that's probably such a fun role because he goes from being like, super chill with Tybalt being like, don't worry about Romeo, it's fine, to being like, you're the worst daughter in the world. And like, it's just such a swing.
But then he loses it with Tybalt at the party, right?
Yes, yeah,
so
that part
like,
where he's
calm
like,
down, relax. And then he's like, you better not shed any blood in this house.
He's like, what did I say? You're a fool. And he's like, there's something about that character that just speaks to me. I know it's such a small part, but I do really love both of those characters. The parents. Anyway, that's such a tangent from we're talking about race. Anyways, but I do wonder about like why so often Juliet is the one that is when not cast with two white actors or two actors of the same ethnicity, she is often cast as like the darker skinned one.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think so much of the time in theater productions until very recently, it was colorblind casting.
Right.
So obviously, which I hate, obviously, but I think, and obviously the audience isn't always colorblind, which is one of the reasons why it's problematic as a casting practice. But
for people who don't know, colorblind casting just means they were doing this thing in the theater where anybody could be cast as any part, but everyone was treated as if they had no race. So it wasn't like, oh, you'd cast a dark-skinned Black person, and then that would become part of the conversation of the play. No, you would just cast a dark-skinned Black person and they'd be like, she's so fair. What beautiful white skin she has. And you just be like, okay. Or like in Midsummers, they talk about like how fair Helena was and how dark Hermia was, but Helena would be Black. And you just be like, we're just going to go with it. And so like parents would they wouldn't look like their children in any way. It would just be like, there's an Asian dad, there's a Mexican son, like figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And there are all sorts of problems that are generated from colorblind casting. And now more and more actors are finding it really, they don't want to be cast in that way anymore. While other actors of color feel like, actually, I just want to play Hamlet. It doesn't really matter how you cast me in terms of my race.
Right.
So it's very subjective, but as a practice, it's not as ethical as we used to think it was. So I think with Juliet, sometimes when I've seen her cast as a woman of color, it's largely been in a colorblind production. And so they're not thinking about race necessarily, even though those dynamics come across. In the production that I was referring to earlier, directed by Ola Ince. He's a Black female director that directed at the Globe in, I think it was 2021. She cast 2 biracial actors who presented as Black, and they talked a lot about that casting decision, which was very, very deliberate. But not to highlight race, but only because they wanted to be very conscious about race when they were thinking about the script and also the performance. So I don't necessarily, I do think that sometimes directors unconsciously fall into stereotyping. Mm-hmm. There's just no question, particularly around the Capulet role. And the more conscious you are, the less likely you are to do that in ways that are offensive.
Yeah. Speaking of colorblind casting, the Baz Luhrmann movie famously casts a Black actor as Mercutio. And now I literally cannot think of that part without a Black actor. I'm like, oh, white people do this role? Since when? But I have to ask you, is there a homoerotic relationship between Romeo and Mercutio?
I think there's definitely queer energy in this play. Definitely.
Between the two of them.
Between the two of them, for sure. Mercutio feels very invested in Romeo and very possessive as well. And there is a sort of dynamic between them that is actually really interesting and beautiful at times. And so, I definitely think there's a queer energy there. And, you think about, definitions of friendship in Shakespeare's time is queer. It is. Male friendship was. It was very much, we can be wholly connected on a Neoplatonic level because there's no sexual tension between us. Apparently. You can't have an equal relationship with a woman because she's not your equal. But 2 men can have a much more meaningful, equal friendship and relationship that's beyond any other kind of level that you can have with a woman because we're equals. And that's the basis of friendship, that if there's a hierarchy there's no true friendship. And so that it develops a sort of a queerness to it, that relationship, and certainly would lean into that from time to time. For sure.
I mean, I had never really thought about that previously, but as I was reading it this time, I was thinking in Acts 2, Scene 4, Romeo and Mercutio sort of like share lines in the same way that he has just done with Juliet. And then later Tybalt refers to them as consorting, which is sometimes like used to mean sex in these plays. So I was like, oh, I had heard that like played at before, like in the Baz Luhrmann version, the actor Harold Perot, I don't know how to say his last name. He is sort of effeminate. And so I'd seen it sort of played at in that way, but I'd never really paid attention to it, like how it shows up in the text itself. And this time it felt really clear to me, because then you have his relationship with Benvolio that does not have that same rhythm or connection. And they don't seem to have much deep conversation at all.
That feels more sibling-y, doesn't it?
It does. I
Benvolio,
joke.
like they're cousins or something.
I was thinking this time around reading it, then Benvolio, I think Benvolio is like such a waste. He's like such a narrator character to me. But I was thinking of him this time as like, he is a reality TV producer's dream, because he comes on and he's like, this is what's going on with our main character. Romeo has this thing going on. Like, he knows what's going on, but he's so removed from it. He's like, if you watch The Bachelor, he's like the person who's definitely not winning, but loves to do the in the moment interviews and be like, this person and this person. And it was such drama.
But
and blah, blah, blah.
he's also trusted. He's the trusted one.
Yes,
right?
he is.
So everybody can go, okay, Benvolio says it's true.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like Horatio in Hamlet, right? I wonder if it was played by the same actor originally.
Oh, interesting.
Because that part is so similar in
Yeah.
in terms of their relationship to the protagonist male.
Right. And like in the relationship then to us, the audience, like that we trust them too. Because I think like, yeah, that's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I guess maybe I had a little bit, because that's the person who, for reality TV, that's the person who relates to you. They're setting the whole thing up.
Yeah. And they're believable.
They're believable, right? And they're clearly liked by the other people around them because they have the information.
Yes. Yes.
What about the Queen Mab speech? I know everybody loves it. It doesn't do a lot for me personally, but what is it about it that do you think that makes it such an important speech to audiences, and like why that? I just feel like there's like such great speeches in this play, and like that's the one everybody loves, and it's just sort of a list. So I'm curious if you have insight to it.
I think it's because it's dense with meaning, and also so expansive in terms of meaning. Like what it means, for example, Baz Luhrmann interpreted that as an acid trip. Right, basically. Whereas it could be interpreted in lots of different ways, and actually the way in which he talks about dreams and sleep, all of a sudden you start identifying with it, and the miniaturizing of that figure, which was something that was really alive in Elizabethan literature at the time. This idea of a fairy queen. And Shakespeare picks up on that in a few places. Obviously, Midsummer Night's Dream being the most obvious one.
Right.
But I think so that speech carries a lot of fantasy and wonder, and it is rich poetry. You're right. It's not the best poetry in the play. I agree with you on that. And a lot of people cut it in production because it is quite expansive. But it's also really esoteric for some people. They're just the audience isn't going to get this. Let's cut this. It doesn't make sense today. So I see that speech actually cut quite harshly in a lot of
cut down
nowadays.
pretty short.
Yeah. But it is iconic. It's iconic. So you can't cut the whole thing.
Yeah.
People will say, where's the Queen Mab speech?
Yeah. You have to at least do like the first like 8 lines and then kind of put it together. Speaking of cutting, Paris in the end, in the tomb, famously cut from the Baz Luhrmann version for reasons that I think make a ton of sense. Every time I read it, I forget that I got to do this whole moment with Romeo and Paris because I think of the movie so much. What do you think of the choice to cut Paris from the movie?
So where is he? I haven't seen the movie for a while. I confess.
So in the play, after Juliet is fake dead, they take her to the tomb. He's in the tomb. He's standing over her. Romeo comes and he's like, I think I hear Romeo. And Romeo's like, who's this guy? And then they fight and Romeo kills Paris. But in the movie, Juliet's laid out in the big church with all the candles and the flowers, just fucking breathtaking imagery. And then Romeo like sneaks in and all the helicopters are outside and it's just the two of them. There is no Paris in there. It's just the two of them. He is crying over her aggressively hard in his young Leonardo DiCaprio heartthrobby way. And then he drinks his poison and then collapses as her little fingers are twitching and she wakes up right when he is dead, and then she like tries to kiss him and then she takes the gun and kills herself. But Paris just, Paul Rudd, sorry about it, you gotta go.
Well, maybe no, but maybe he didn't want Paul Rudd to get killed. Nobody wants to see Paul Rudd being killed.
Well, that's true. But at the time, we barely knew Paul Rudd.
Yeah,
we
that's
maybe
true.
had seen him in Clueless. He wasn't the Paul Rudd we know now, though. Those are Paul Rudd's two best roles: Clueless and Romeo and Juliet. He peaked in the 90s.
I think the effect of that is Romeo's character, right? It has meaning for his character because it means that he's not racking up. He's not becoming a serial killer. In fact, just yesterday, my daughter said, Romeo and Hamlet are serial killers. She goes, I don't know why you love Shakespeare. She's studying acting, by the way.
Some of us love a serial killer, so that's why we like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a serial killer. He kills everybody. I mean, in this play, he just tacks on Lady Montague. It's like, by the way, she's dead.
She's dead.
Who?
Yeah, I think it changes how we view him. And, he killing Paris, who's an utterly innocent bystander in this whole thing. Yeah.
Well, but he also forces the issue. He's also like partly to blame for the whole fallout. If he had backed off and not tried to get married to someone the moment after her cousin dies or whatever, maybe we have enough time to, make it happen. Like, he's a predator still. He wants to marry a 13-year-old.
Well, I mean, by our standards, yes, that is predatorial behavior. But I would say that if we don't think about, like, do we know how old Paris is? We know he's older, and he's older. Yeah. But I would say, and I'm not saying that I think he's the best character in the play, but I would say that I never saw him as a predator, right? I saw him as like, I got to get a wife because I've got to do this thing that I've been told I have to do as an aristocrat living in this society in the 16th century. So I've got to keep pushing my boat in the direction that I've been told it needs to get pushed. And that's what he's doing. He's trying to get good. And he knows that she doesn't have any siblings. She has no older brothers. So he's like, I've got to lock this one down, right?
But this is all predatory. He's after her for her money. She's a young girl. We know he's older. And also the scene when they meet at Friar Lawrence's cell and he's like, come on, let's do it. And she's like, okay, I got to pray or whatever. And he's like, tell me you love me. She's like, I love my husband. And he's like, that's me. You love me. Like he's a little aggressive. I feel like he gets a good edit in the minds of millennials like me because Paul Rudd played him. But I think in the text, he's slightly more of an asshole.
So you would like to have seen him get killed at the end of the Baz Luhrmann?
Well, no, I'm glad he's not in the scene because in the Baz Luhrmann, it's just so much better. Because if you get him killed, then Juliet and Romeo aren't like almost alive at the same moment. Yes, every time I see the Baz Luhrmann, I'm like, they were so close. But in the in the play and in there's time in between. You have the whole part where the friar comes in and is like, let me get you to the nunnery, girl. And she's like, no, I'm going to stay and kill myself. It's fine. No big deal. But I do think that I think a lot of the characters in this play who aren't Romeo and Juliet get, I believe the Shakespeare phrase is short shrift. Like they don't get to be like full characters in our imaginations because we're so focused on Romeo and Juliet. But I do think that there's like a version of Paris that's either sort of like a disgusting buffoon kind of guy, or maybe like a bit of a sleazy, money hungry predator. And I think most of the time he ends up kind of just being a guy who delivers a few lines. But there's definitely, like, with the right actor, there's commentary on him too.
Yeah, but I think, as you say, those characters who are less rounded Shakespeare leaves that open.
Yeah.
And so you might see a different lady. Like, I don't love Lady Capulet, for example.
Why not?
Because she's a horrible mother.
Yes.
She's a horrible mother.
But this is why I love her. Like, I love her as for an actor. Like, I think she's a great part to play.
Yeah. So that is a good part. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But I find her, there's some female characters in Shakespeare and male characters that are conventionally loved that I think, I don't love this person. Why does everybody love Portia in Merchant of Venice? She's Shakespeare's Karen. I don't understand it.
She is.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so but we seem to think she's so great because she gives a good speech about mercy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't love Lady Capulet because I think that that's my reading of her, because
Yeah.
as a mother of a teenage girl, I'm like, what are you doing, lady?
Yeah.
Right. So, but she's not she doesn't have enough dimensionality,
Right.
For anything else but my imagination, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for Paris as well. But I hear what you're saying. I think if you think about it from that perspective, then yeah, maybe if you do draw a line from the beginning of his moment to the end, that there is like an aggressiveness there for sure.
Yeah. And like the way that he's like, prostrate over her, my own stage direction, not Shakespeare's, but like saying how much he loved her at the end, where it's like, we've seen none of this. Like there's some sort of performance to him. And you know who else we didn't talk about at all, who I'm sort of lukewarm on, but a lot of people also love, is the nurse. We haven't talked about her. What do you make of the nurse?
I think for me, it always depends on who plays it. So the nurse in the text itself, yeah, fine. Yeah, I understand that character. I understand the function she had in Juliet's life, that she was the soft place to fall that Juliet had growing up, because her mother certainly didn't fill that role. And so there is a kind of interconnection and interdependence between her and Juliet that at times seems unhealthy.
That's a very gentle way to put it.
Yeah, but I mean, that was I'm always coming at it as a historian as well, but that was the weird relationship that, aristocratic girls had with their nurses, or the gentlewomen who were attending on them, that knew their most intimate secrets and had their most, dressed them and bathed them and did everything with them. And so there's a kind of truth and repository that she is for Juliet's entire being in some ways. So yeah, that can be seen from a modern perspective as 100% unhealthy.
Yeah.
But depending on who plays her, I've seen her played in a way that's made me retch at the nurse, and her overbearing, interventional behavior, the confusion that she causes when she seems to be really supportive of Juliet, and then all of a sudden says, just do what your parents tell you to do.
Yeah.
But you do get that insight into how she has been treated and how she might be treated by the father.
Right. Yeah.
And so that will have an impact on her behavior. But I do, for me, so much of it is about how actors get inside those characters.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially with this play, because so many of us know it so well. And we've been taught it and we've seen it, that it's like, it's hard to sometimes imagine people performing it in a way that isn't a way that you've seen it or thought of it in your own brain. But I'm lukewarm on the nurse, but also I could be swayed by a great performance.
A great performance. But what was when you first were taught this play? What were you taught about the nurse? Because I know that I've had teachers. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I had teachers who just kind of said, these are what the words mean.
Yeah.
Here's a dictionary. Here's a quiz. Take a quiz. And nobody's really giving out, this is how you should read the nurse. Actually, this is a villain. This is a hero. This is,
right.
I wasn't taught that.
Yeah, I was never taught
either.
to really make sense of her, what to do with her. I think probably more so than any of the other characters in the play. I think like in the way that it was taught, I think all the boyfriends, Romeo and all his guy friends, was definitely taught, like, because those early scenes, I feel like those early scenes that like play on the feud, like the first street fight and whatever, those scenes got a lot of attention.
Because
and I feel like
they're dangerous. The play opens with danger.
Right. But I feel like in the scope of the actual plot of the story, you sort of get that information almost from the prologue, right? Like we know they hate each other. There's blood in the streets. Things are bad. But we spend so much time on that part of the feud when really like the only other time the feud comes up is like with Tybalt and Capulet. And Capulet's like, whatever, it's fine, you guys. And I sort of wonder, like, again, to the idea of like adults behaving badly, I sort of wonder if Capulet and Montague could have just probably squashed it at this point. They're both old, like they're in their 50s or 60s. Like, I feel like the kids took the mantle of it.
Yeah, but I think that's the whole point about the legacy of feuds.
Right.
And
No, I
hate,
agree.
right?
I think it's the point of it. I guess what I'm saying is like in an alternate universe, it sort of feels like there's a world where they could just be like, oh, our kids really like each other. Like, let's just be cool and move on, because they
Which
clearly
is what they
don't
discover
actually
at the end.
Yeah. Like they actually don't really care anymore. Like they're like, we're old men. We don't really care. But the whole mantle of the fighting has been passed to the next generation. And I think like, but again, that is to that idea of like adults behaving badly. If they had been better adults and had said like, you know what, we got to squash this. Like people are dying. This is silly. In that first scene with the prince, if they had agreed to just be cool, like, you know, there is no play, but also that's a lesson too on, you know, who's in charge here? I think that's like the big question of the play for me sometimes is like, who's pulling the strings? Like, who's setting all of this in motion? It's really the adults around the kids. It's not the kids. Their idea is like, we love each other. And then Friar Lawrence is like, get married. It'll fix it. And they're like, okay, great. And then the dad's like, no, you got to get married to this person. And then he's like, well, take this fake point. Like, it's like the adults are constantly moving them around. And they're sort of just like, we want to make out and like do poems at each other.
I think I have a couple thoughts about what you just said. So I think that going back to the idea of the early scene and the fights on the street, I think that's important. I think that content is really important. I think it sets things up that creates a dangerous context for an incredibly volatile love. Yeah. And I think that tension that you talked about earlier is part of that volatility. It fuels that volatility.
I agree.
And without that, the play just doesn't have pace. It doesn't have energy. And you need to have that. Did you bite your thumb at me?
Yeah.
You know, you've got to have that sort of in your face kind of stuff.
Right.
And that's the bit that a lot of, you know, the productions that kind of look at street crime and that try to get kids sort of thinking about the dangers of knife crime or gun violence, etc. That's a really great space for those kinds of explorations as well. But then you were talking about what was the next point I was
about
make?
Adults pulling the strings.
And I think they absolutely are. They're absolutely pulling the strings. And I think that's what's under the microscope in the play is the methodology. As I was saying earlier, what is your relationship to your children? In Shakespeare's time, it was punitive. And, you know, I remember doing research on adolescence in the 16th century. Was there such a thing as adolescence? And they didn't identify it as a particular time, but there's lots of sort of commentary at the time about how there's this stage where, you know, where kids are becoming adults, and they go through this sort of recalcitrant phase or stubborn phase, and that kind of language is used a lot to describe them. I also discovered that teenage suicide was pretty common in 16th century England. Yeah. And there was a lot of fear, like being afraid of your parents was a very common thing, like absolute terror, right? A story I read about, one boy actually killed himself. He jumped into the river and drowned because he'd stolen something and he didn't want his father to find out. So he killed himself because he'd rather kill himself than face the wrath of his father. So it was one of those societies in which you were constantly being punished, and violence was part of that punishment.
That's so interesting. Okay, we're sort of out of time. I do want to ask you, normally we talk about the title and the cover, but because there's so many covers and so many versions of this play, and the title it nails it, I think it's spot on. I want to ask you just to gush a little bit about this play. Do you have a favorite scene, character, speech, anything like that for you really is like the best of this play?
Oh, God, yes. I think it's when he first sees her. I mean, it's such a cliche. I'm such a cliche, but it's only because of the Zeffirelli film. And that moment when he sees her. And I guess the Lerman film does it too. Just the beauty and it just captures me because I'm a romantic and I believe so very deeply in that kind of love.
Yeah.
And I experienced in my relationship that I'm in now, love at first sight. Like absolutely saw him and I just knew I was going to marry that man. And I just, I didn't think it was something that was real, but Romeo and Juliet capture that for me in that moment when they first see each other. It's so beautiful. And it is something that, if I watch that Zeffirelli film, it makes me weep when I see it, because it's something we all, well, I can't say everybody wants it, but I always wanted it when I was a young girl. Yeah.
I love
cliche.
That. Yeah, but it's okay. I'm a cliche of myself, and I love violence and death and sad things.
So what is your moment?
I do love the balcony scene. I do. Yeah. I really love the balcony scene. And I always thought that my favorite part of the play was the gallop apace speech that Juliet delivers before before she finds out that Romeo's banished. And then in that scene, she finds out. And then the speech at the end is the banished speech that she does. And this time around, the banished speech, I read it like 5 times. I thought it was phenomenal. And it had never really triggered anything in me previously. But this time around, there was something about the balance of the banished speech and the gallop apace speech, like the bookends of this scene, that just really, I mean, I just think she's such a great character. I think she's one of Shakespeare's best woman characters. I think that
she is.
Yeah, she just has so many great speeches. She's so smart. She's so like analytical. She's weighing her options. She's always asking like the right questions of people. She's like, I love her.
When I was writing my book, I wrote about that speech on her ode to night. And actually that speech is phenomenal. And I feel like every time I read this play, I rediscover something. I think you just really made me think about that. In terms of like right now, this speech means this to me.
Yeah.
But I really, you talking about how amazing Juliet is. I wanted to recommend a book, which you may be aware of, which is Sophie Duncan's book called Searching for Juliet.
I don't know it.
It just came out this year.
Okay.
It's, if you love Juliet, you'll love this book because she talks about the way Juliet has been sort of romanticized and how creepy it's been, and productions and movies. Sophie's a kind of Rolodex of all the productions and film versions.
Okay.
So it's a really, really great piece to read alongside this play.
Okay, I love it. Wait, I have one last quick question, then we'll be done. Does this entire play take place in a week?
Less than,
right? It's like a Saturday to a Thursday.
It's I think it's just 2.5 days. It's not even that much. I might have that wrong. I need to go back. But
I think what you get. Yeah. Well, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's Saturday they meet. Sunday they get married. Sunday night everyone's killed.
That's it.
Monday, because the dad's like, well, what's the day after whatever? And they're like, Wednesday. And they're like, okay, well, let's do Thursday. But then they bump it back up to Wednesday.
Yes.
So the only place I was unclear was whether when Romeo actually makes it to the tomb, is it later on Wednesday or is it moved over to Thursday? But it
could be the wee hours of Thursday.
Yeah.
But it's just literally a few days and nobody sleeps.
No, nobody sleeps. Well, will Romeo and Juliet fall asleep for a moment so that they can wake up to say, is it the nightingale or the lark? But other than that, everyone's up all night. Farah, this was so awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm just so happy we have to do Shakespeare more on this show because this is such a joy for me. Thank you.
Next one, Titus.
Oh, I'd love to do Titus. I think Titus was on my list. Definitely come back and do Titus. I love. We'll do the opposite of romance. We'll do the violent one. The destruction one. Everyone, you can get Farah's book, The Great White Bard, wherever you get your books. I'm sure you can also get a copy of Romeo and Juliet there if you've never read it. Thank you so much, Farah, and everyone else. We will see you in the stacks. All right, y'all. That does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. Another year of the Stacks episode is in the books. Thank you to Farah Karim-Cooper for returning to the show. And thank you again to Julia Ricard for helping to make this conversation possible. And now it is time for our big announcement. Our first book club pick for the year 2024 is going to be the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. You might be familiar with Percival Everett because we did one of his books, The Trees, a few years back. And this one, Erasure, is a satirical take on race in the publishing world. It also was just turned into the movie American Fiction, written and directed by Cord Jefferson. We're going to discuss the book on January 31st, and you have to listen on January 3rd to find out who our guest will be for that episode. If you love the show and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks and join the Stacks Pack. Make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And you can, of course, check out our website, thestackspodcast.com. Today's episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Lauren Tyree. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tegirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.